Welcoming you live to the field here at Autzen Stadium following Oregon State's 31-7 loss to the Oregon Ducks. Here to close out the regular season, Brenden Slaughter, publisher of BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge writer Keenan Puncocher. We just got done with Oregon State's press conference. Make sure to head over to BeaversEdge.com as we have the latest comments from Jonathan Smith and some stuff we'll get into a little bit later here in the video breakdown. But Keenan, obviously a one-sided affair here at Autzen tonight. That kind of seems to be a theme for Oregon State throughout the years, but unfortunately, Oregon State just didn't, we'll dive into it, they just didn't have nearly enough. I mean, easily the worst game of the season.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, just not enough in the tank. Oregon definitely took away all facets that Oregon State specializes in, and they just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, I mean, it really was, Keenan. I mean, you know, there's a lot of different ways you could break down this game, and we knew coming in that Oregon was going to be a really tough opponent, and the fact that, you know, they were one game away from Pac-12 championship, or going to the Pac-12 championship, which they clinched with the win. The fact that, you know, they had played great football all season long since that loss to Washington. And, you know, we could even see, and, you know, starting with Jonathan before we break into the game, you know, he even mentioned afterwards, he's like, this is an amazing Oregon team. And, you know, I'm not sure he would quite say it about his rival, Keenan, but it looked to me like he thinks Oregon's a better team than Washington.
Yeah, you know, he was asked about kind of comparing performances between Washington and Oregon this week, and he definitely gave a lot of credit to Bo Nix, just kind of carving them up all across the field, making, you know, across the field throws, and of course, you know, the weather last week in Corvallis was a bit of a factor with the rain. Crisp, clear night tonight, and Bo just thrived.
Yeah, no, he had a big game across the field. I mean, obviously starting with Oregon, I mean, Tez Johnson and Troy Franklin, I mean, what a game for those two. I mean, you talk about what Oregon State was able to hold Michael Penix to last week, Keenan. We even said today, you know, if Oregon State could copy and paste that game plan from last week defensively, you know, you'd be in a good spot. And, you know, Bo Nix was really able to carve up this Oregon State defense today. He made some throws that, you know, I know Oregon State fans that are watching don't want to hear it, but he made some throws that were Heisman level. I mean, it's you know, it's just you have to game, respect game kind of a thing. And he made some incredible plays tonight, and there were several plays where it looked like Oregon State had him dead to rights, and he spun out and made, you know, almost looked like vintage Russell Wilson there. Keenan, just the plays he made, his receivers got open, and you know, Oregon State secondary was obviously a little banged up coming into the game, but still had Jaden Robinson, Noble Thomas was back, and Achille Arnold was back and ended up playing. It just didn't matter.
No, and unless we missed it while we were, you know, waiting for the press game conference, I don't believe he was sacked on the night either. I don't think the Beavers got a sack. So, you know, the pressure at times, yes, but then you'd see Nix just kind of scramble out of it and pretty much carve him up the way he wanted.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk into when this game was won and lost, Keenan. And, you know, obviously Oregon jumps out to a 14-0 lead in this. The Beavers, you know, kick the ball off. They win the opening coin toss, get the ball to start the second. And, you know, Oregon goes up 14. It's looking like things are really trending in Oregon's direction. You know, have a couple, you know, not so great first drives from Oregon State, you know, some, you know, interesting play calling that we'll get into both here and in our takeaways piece at BeaversEdge.com. But for the most part, Keenan, I want to zoom in on that final drive before the half. Oregon State put together their best and only scoring drive of the night. As you can see on the scoreboard here behind me, it was 31-7, and it was 14-7 with 48 seconds left before the half, Keenan. And Oregon State, for all intents and purposes, was in the game.
Yep.
Like, you're down 7 going into the halftime break. You get the ball to open the second half, and then you talk about how Oregon State, to open the drive, open that third quarter, did manage to go all the way down into Duck territory. They ended up turning the ball over on downs, being down 14. But Keenan, if you're only down 7 in that spot, right? So Oregon gets the ball back, 48 seconds left before the halftime break, and they proceed to put together one of the most impressive scoring drives I've seen this season, capped off with a Troy Franklin touchdown. You know, not too deep to get into on the Oregon side, Keenan, but from the Oregon State perspective, just talk about how Trent Bray and that defense, you cannot have that on the road in a rivalry game to close out the half. Not to say what Oregon State was fully out of the game going into it, you know, going to the halftime break down 14 and, you know, still getting the ball to start the second. But if those rules were reversed, completely different game, I think, and I think Oregon State might believe that they can do it at halftime and believe they can come back kind of like last year, and only allowed 14, then 21 compared to last year. But at the end of the day, like, you just can't have that drive.
No, just completely defeating, and especially as you said, you're expecting to get the ball back, maybe even tie the game up after halftime, and then to allow that touchdown, not just any touchdown, it was 41-yard, completion for the touchdown. We were joking in the press box how the Ducks didn't even have to use a timeout on that drive. Right. They just continued to work the clock and got it all the way down. So I think, maybe not the single biggest backbreaker, if you will, because, Oregon State still had a second half, but it definitely, how do you not as a player, feel dejected, especially, on the defense, because you do your best to stop them. It looked like it was going to be 14 going into half, and then you just give up that long drive.
Right. Again, that game was won and lost there, like Keenan said. Instead of going down at halftime 7 with a chance to tie the game in the third quarter, you're instead down 2 touchdowns, and I think that kind of led to that first drive of that offensive third quarter, Keenan, where Oregon State turns the ball over on downs, and it's like if you're down 7 and then you're in rain, it's just the butterfly effect,
especially with this crowd at Autzen, just how loud and dynamic these fans can be, how hard it is to play. It's freezing tonight. And so
in case you could tell by Keenan and I's breath.
So it's those are the moments you really have to capitalize, and it just didn't happen.
Right. And going back to why it maybe didn't happen for Oregon State, Keenan, let's go ahead and break down some of the numbers. Right away, just one of Oregon State's worst offensive performances in some time. We went back and looked. It was actually the lowest point total for Oregon State since the 2019 season. There were a couple games, you mentioned Washington and Utah, they put up 7 points. So you're going really far back in the Jonathan Smith era to find a game where you were just this inefficient. Keenan talked about, the Beavers not getting into the red zone a ton in this game, and then this game really starts and finishes offensively for me for the lack of a run game. We talked about it this week. We knew it'd be a tough, deal for Henley Bloomfield to be out on the offensive line. The Beavers did get Grant Start back this week to take his spot, so that was helpful. But for the most part, Oregon State was really just not able to run block the way that they had. And maybe that's a credit to Oregon. Jonathan Smith talked about it in the post-game press conference that, the Ducks had mightily improved in the trenches and what have you. But, for the most part, Keenan, not being able to get Damian Martinez and that ground game going, finishes with 32 yards on the night. And, since he had become starter halfway through last season, he had not had a game like this. Obviously, too, Joshua Gray, left tackle, who had made more starts at left tackle than just about anybody in school history. He was a late scratch for this game as well. So I think when you combine all those things, losing the entire left side of your line in just 1 week, Keenan, that's going to have an impact. And, Damian Martinez, no one will argue his talent, but
right.
We thought he had to earn things last week. Oregon made him earn it this week.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And pretty much just stopped him cold. The entire rushing attack of the Beavers, I think as a whole, just a little over 2 yards a carry for the entire team. Yeah. So it just shut him down. And then, you kind of made the team one-dimensional. Had some good open routes. Gould got involved a couple times. Good
Irish had a couple good catches.
Yeah.
The passing game was odd, Keenan, because it's like they weren't able to get so much going. The interesting thing is, even in the third quarter, I mentioned you up in the press box, I'm like, the receivers are getting open. Mm-hmm. It just was, at that point, back to the offensive line, DJ was under duress almost. I believe they only had 1 or 2 sacks of DJ, but for the most part, he was under duress. He was dropping. You think of a 5-step drop, he was almost 10 steps back drop, just to try to avoid that pressure that Oregon was coming. And of course, Mateo, his brother, getting a sack on him as well. And it's ultimately, Keenan, like the Oregon State offense. This was an abysmal performance.
It was, just from all around. And Oregon State, especially, I think more so in the second quarter, like we talked about, they kind of fought back, closed down that third down gap and whatnot. They got a little bit closer. Turnovers weren't really a battle or a big point of a factor. You wouldn't say necessarily penalties either, right, here and there, but at the end of the day, Ducks just completely outplay the team.
Yeah, and obviously, with that loss, Oregon State falls to 8-4 on the year, 5-4 in Pac-12 play. Definitely, you could tell when we talked to DJ Uiagalelei and Anthony Gould in the press conference. There's some raw emotions to this one, and you can tell that. We talked about it coming in, Keenan. I think there will be a sense of some meat on the bone left this season. When coming into this game, you and I talked about it. This was the only game all year Oregon State was not favored, and they finished with an 8-4 record. So when you look at it like that, a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and and it was mentioned again in the post game conference. Just back-to-back weeks battling top 10 teams.
Right.
I mean, it's
tough.
very difficult to do, and especially I think when you get so close on paper to beating the Huskies last week,
Right.
22-20, and then you have to have the massive task of coming into Autzen and playing, and all the hype is around the Ducks right now, and this and that. So yeah, it's a little disappointing, especially I think, you look back and say the earlier two games, Washington State and Arizona especially.
Big misses.
You can't beat up on them too bad of playing the talent that they did the last 2 weeks, but it definitely was pretty lopsided tonight.
Sure, and that's where we talked coming into the season that Oregon State really only had one mulligan because, you would have thought that they would have been able to split these two games, and you look back that the game last week against Washington at home was much more winnable, and, as you mentioned, that game was right there and one that Oregon State just wasn't able to come out with, and that's where, they'll ultimately come down to settle for a good season instead of a great season, and I think, that's definitely a bit of a disappointment, but last but not least, Keenan, let's talk about the stuff that everyone really wants to talk about, and that's head coach Jonathan Smith.
Fast forward, no.
So, yeah, let's go ahead and zip through this game, because while this game did happen, Keenan, to say that Jonathan Smith was not a distraction this week would be a massive understatement.
Yeah, of course, lots of rumors about his future and where he may end up going, and of course, news breaking maybe right before the game of certain rumors, I guess, if you will, that he's going certain places, and I think it was definitely probably weighing on the minds a little bit of players, and you probably mentioned it, but Jonathan Smith a bit cryptic in the post game, as we expect.
Right, and here's what we know from the post game. Right, Jonathan Smith got asked several times by the media point blank about Michigan State and the fact that he has supposedly gotten an offer. He didn't really dive into it too much, other than to say that no decisions have been made. So breaking that down, Keenan, just right away, that's obviously good news for Oregon State. It means that there still could be an opportunity for Oregon State's athletic department. He was asked about his conversations with Scott Barnes, and ultimately it's who knows exactly how to break it down. You said cryptic yourself, but I'll say this. After all the news that we had heard leading in, all the news, the chitter-chatter from up in the press box, that particular sequence would calm me down if I'm an Oregon State fan. A little bit.
I agree, yeah. Especially, and it's hard to... You don't want to breathe too much into players' emotions. Gould was pretty emotional after the game, and there was a couple comments about, letting Jonathan speak for his own self, for his future, and kind of seemed a little eerie,
ominous,
a little ominous. And then I think Jonathan did a good job of kind of calming things down a little bit and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. We kept touching too in the post game about the whole Pac-12 collapse and all of that factoring into possible distractions for the team. And Jonathan said, 4 months, we just have to go into it and focus and hone in and tune out the noise. But it's hard to do. Right,
and maybe this is also just Jonathan being Jonathan as far as coach speak, Keenan. But the fact that he took an entire question to break down how excited he was to play in the bowl game with this team, which again, perhaps it's lip service, who knows? But at the end of the day, a coach that was potentially had his foot out the door, last thing he's thinking about is a bowl game.
Right.
So there is that. I mean, and again, Oregon State, is going to go to a bowl game, unlike other years when Keenan and I have sat here at Autzen Stadium and this has been the end of the season, or even, a couple years ago when it was just a 7-win campaign. Oregon State's got 8 wins. They're projected to be, in a solid bowl game this year and still have the opportunity for a 9-win campaign, which obviously would be big. But, Keenan, obviously still the news is Jonathan Smith. Michigan State had finished their season tonight as well. Something will happen this weekend.
Yep. Yes, it will, and we'll find out because and it will be quick. It'll be quick, and then we've been through enough of these too, where it's like, it does seem like things are going to happen, and then all of a sudden we hear the news. It's like, oh, okay, well then I guess it was true or it wasn't true. Right. So it's be on alert, I guess, Beaver fans.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that the kind of risk meter of sorts kind of it spiked before kickoff and spiked during the game and maybe came back down a little bit. And I think Jonathan, you could even tell just talking to him, Keenan, excuse me. Sorry, I've been talking to TJ a lot tonight too. And I was just with Jonathan Smith specifically, Keenan. He got asked about what would he weigh when thinking about this. His heart, his mind, finances, so on and so forth. And it's going to be interesting because obviously, if the reports are true, we've heard that, a contract could have potentially been offered this week. So with that, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of soul searching Jonathan Smith does these next 24 or 48 hours because, regardless, and something TJ and I mentioned on the podcast this week, he will never go anywhere where he is loved more than here.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Hometown kid, play for the team.
Hero.
Personally, don't want to see him leave myself. And so it's kind of that mixed emotions. And I'm sure not only are the players kind of feeling that same thoughts, but, coaches as well. They're, kind of thinking ahead of what they're going to be doing. So, yeah, it's kind of a unknown time, especially with all the uncertainty with conference realignment.
No doubt, as again, today was Oregon State's final Pac-12 game. The Pac-12 for football purposes, at least regards to Oregon State, is now defunct. I suppose they're still going to have a Pac-12 championship game this next weekend, Keenan, and a baseball season, a basketball season, and all the other sports seasons. But for all football purposes, it's just about in the cooler, and that part of it you could tell was kind of weighing on the guys a little bit. And last thing before we wrap up this video breakdown, again, Oregon State falls to Oregon 31-7 here at Autzen Stadium. I found it interesting talking to Anthony Gould, and he kind of peeled back the curtain a little bit, Keenan, saying, y'all don't know what it's been like to go through this week in and week out. Right. And that is the first time all year a player has not been like, it's outside noise, we're not talking about it, it doesn't concern us. And that specifically, that scene spoke to me a little bit tonight. It
contributed to, I think, the emotions and just all of it, especially, knowing that the regular season is over and kind of to go out the way that they did, of course, is never great.
Right.
So, yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack there. Again, check out BeaversEdge.com. We'll have takeaways from Keenan and I. We also got the post-game press conference. Hear from Jonathan Smith yourself as he kind of dodges, I think is a fair question. There were a couple times when, he even mentioned, we're just going to stay here. So it's going to be interesting. I would tell Beaver fans that, nothing is done. Nothing is finalized. There's lots of things, and, coaches have been known to make last-minute decisions going one way or the other time and time again. So, again, stay locked to BeaversEdge.com. We'll continue to bring you guys coverage throughout. Obviously, have a big couple weeks now, before Oregon State's bowl game that's coming up. Obviously, that's the end of the month, Keenan, but some big things that have to be addressed before them. Coaches, you have players entering potentially the transfer portal this next week, or, 2 weeks from now, following the conference championship games. So it's going to be an interesting week for Oregon State as they're idle, no bowl game, no nothing yet, just to kind of get through this week. So
definitely.
It's going to be interesting. Again, make sure to stay locked to BeaversEdge.com. Brenden Slaughter, Keenan Puncocher signing off here at Autzen Stadium.